Welcome to Starbound. My name is James Victor and I will be your narrator today. If you enjoy human-created HFY stories and want to support us, we are now on Patreon. There you will get access to exclusive stories you won't hear anywhere else. The link is in the description. Now, let's get into it. The Vindicator's blade was due. Sub-Commander Teth stood at his station and delivered the pre-return report in the measured cadence of a man who had done this many times and had no cause to do it differently. Mission parameters nominal throughout the transit. No distress signals received. Return window open. Contact expected within the quarter hour. Everything as projected. Grand Admiral Eitri received the report without comment. He stood at the forward rail on the flag bridge of the Imperator's will, with his hands clasped behind his back and his cobalt eyes on the transit corridor telemetry. There was nothing to say. The Vindicator's blade had been dispatched to the Sol system with a simple instruction. Make clear to the humans what it meant to stand in the full attention of the Kaltori Armada. The diplomatic channels had already been observed. The ship was what came after. Its presence was the argument. The argument had never failed. Around him, the flag bridge held its ordered silence. 8 stations, 8 staff officers. Every function of the command structure operating exactly as designed. The Kaltori did not build idleness into their schedules any more than they built redundancy into their hulls. One acceptable condition. He had never required a second. In the years he had held this command, Eitri had been wrong before, about small things, the kind of things that produced adjustments. He had never been wrong about anything that mattered. About the direction of an engagement, the behavior of an enemy, or the outcome of a mission assigned to a capable captain with sufficient force and clear orders. Those things went as planned because they were planned correctly. The transit corridor was ready. The return window was open. The transit corridor activated. The contact emerged. "Contact confirmed," Teth said. His voice was level. "Log the return. The mission is complete," Eitri said. "Emergence coordinates within acceptable variance." A half-second of silence. In 11 years at Eitri's side, Teth did not pause mid-report. "Arrival timestamp is within 3 minutes of projected return." "Then why did you stop?" "The mass reading, Admiral. It is 37% above vessel specification." Teth's stylus found his data slate and kept moving, recording at speed. "The energy signature is impure. It is a composite. There are multiple source types, none conforming to Kaltori's standard configuration. The whole profile is asymmetrical. There are external additions visible on long-range sensors. The configuration does not correspond to any vessel in the registry." "Transponder?" A breath. "It is broadcasting a Kaltori military identifier. It is corrupted, Admiral." Eitri said nothing immediately. The timestamp had arrived with the report, and the timestamp was within 3 minutes of schedule. Whatever had been done to the Vindicator's blade, whatever the sensor array was showing him, the ship had left human space and returned to the fleet anchorage on time. That detail sat in a part of Eitri's thinking. A vessel that had suffered whatever this was should not be on schedule. It was on schedule. He set the detail aside and kept it. "The captain's channel?" he asked. "Silent. Crew manifest confirms Captain Corven is aboard. He has not initiated contact." Teth set his data slate down with care. "I have flagged it as anomalous." "I had not considered it anything else." He read the silence the way he read everything, as data. Corven was aboard. Corven was not speaking. A captain who had completed a mission and returned to the fleet anchorage had exactly one correct course of action, and Corven had never, in the years Eitri had trusted him with a command, required correction. The silence was either insubordination, or it was something he did not have a category for yet. He filed both possibilities without deciding between them. "Visual." The main display resolved the contact. It was the Vindicator's blade, the way a ship was still a ship after it had been taken apart and reassembled by someone with different opinions about what a ship should be. The ship's core geometry was still there, somewhere, but additions covered it on every plane, mismatched hull plating over the original skin, external conduits bracketed in clean, methodical runs along the port side, scaffolding fitted across the reactor housing with a thoroughness that implied someone had found the original arrangement deeply inadequate. The clean load-bearing geometry of Kaltori design doctrine, a warship that carried nothing it did not need and needed nothing it did not carry, was buried under the unsolicited judgment of a species that had apparently looked at the finest vessel in the armada and decided it required improvement. The scaffolding was the detail that would not leave him. Fitted at regular intervals, load distributed with evident care, brackets at even pacing. Whoever had done it had assessed the original structure, found it wanting, and corrected it as a matter of course. There was no indication that they had considered whether the ship's owner might have had their own views on the subject. No member of his flagstaff spoke. No one moved. The discipline held because it always held. That was correct. That was the only response available to someone who had given their service to a doctrine whose first and final principle was that what was well designed did not fail. Eitri looked at the image on the display, at the conduit runs and the plating and the scaffolding over his finest ship's hull. His hands, clasped at the small of his back, did not move. His expression did not change. His cobalt eyes did not blink. He was not, in that moment, calm. His was the stillness of a man whose framework for how the galaxy worked had just returned from human space, carrying a manifest of improvements.
"Open a channel to the Vindicator's blade," he said. "I will speak with Captain Corven, now."
The channel opened. Captain Corven was not on it. The figure on screen was human, male, middle-aged, wearing plain work clothing that appeared well worn. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. There was a dark smear across the back of his right hand. He was holding a data slate in the manner of a man accounting clearly for a completed task. "Grand Admiral, Chief Warrant Officer 5 Homer Wallen, United Nations Space Navy, Lead Shipfitter aboard Jupiter Engineering and Maintenance, Station 4, Gem 4. I apologize for the pre-recorded format, but it seemed the clearest way to get everything across. By the time you watch this, we'll be back on shift. I'll keep it brief." He glanced at his data slate. "Your vessel arrived at Sol approach with 217 critical safety violations. I'll cover the significant ones. The plasma conduit configuration was the first thing we flagged. Catastrophic wouldn't be an overstatement. Your port side was hemorrhaging energy on every cycle. The hull plating over the primary reactor housing, I want to be tactful here. We've seen freighters with better shielding. The one that concerned my team most was life support. No redundant system. One failed coupling and you'd have lost the whole crew. Couldn't leave that." He moved to the next item. "We've reinforced the superstructure at the 4 primary stress points, decentralized the power grid, and fitted a blade of armor over the reactor housing using surplus freighter composites. Full specifications are in the work order your captain is carrying. All of it is documented." His voice shifted very slightly into a register that was almost gentle. "We checked your registration filing and saw you were due home at 1400 your fleet standard time yesterday. We worked to your schedule. Didn't want to cause a fuss. Your people run a tight timetable. We respected that." He looked directly into the lens. "No charge, of course. Professional courtesy. We suggested to your captain that he let us do the explaining first. He wasn't very enthusiastic about that idea. He came around. He has the full set of work orders and our debrief. Your crew are comfortable. They seemed a bit stressed. Safe travels." The screen went dark. On the flag bridge of the Imperator's will, no one spoke. The silence was not ceremonial. It was the silence of a room full of officers who had just been told by someone with grease on his hands and a pleasant voice that the Vindicator's blade had been towed to a human shipyard and returned to them on schedule, at no charge, as a professional courtesy. Eitri looked at the dark screen. Then he turned to Teth.
"Get me every data file from that ship's mission recorder," he said quietly. "Everything."
The data files took 15 minutes to transfer. Eitri spent them at the forward rail, facing the display that still held the image of the Vindicator's blade. Teth did not speak during the transfer. Neither did anyone else.
"Arrival log,"
Eitri said when the transfer was confirmed.
"Play it from first contact."
The recording had the slight compression of deep space transmission. Corvin's voice came through clearly nonetheless. The formal register he kept for command declarations, each word given its full weight.
"Attention, Sol System! This is Captain Corven of the Kaltori warship Vindicator's Blade. operating under the authority of Grand Admiral Eitri of the Kaltori Armada. You are instructed to stand down all defensive systems and prepare to receive a formal communication of intent. Non-compliance will be treated as an act of hostility.
A pause in the recording. Then the response.
Sir, this is Soul Traffic Control, Priority Channel. Please power down your primary weapons array immediately. You're creating a gravimetric disturbance for civilian traffic.
A brief pause. The mild distraction of a person managing several things at once.
Also, our deep spectrum scan is picking up some worrying fluctuations in your drive signature. Please hold position for an engineering inspection.
Eitri had prepared, in the time before the playback began, a catalog of possible responses. Defiance, panic, a counter-threat, or a hurried capitulation. He had ranked them in order of likelihood and assigned a course of action to each. The catalog did not have an entry for mildly annoyed traffic management. He was aware that this was itself a piece of information. The Vindicator's blade was the finest warship in the Kaltori Armada. That designation had meaning, not merely excellence of construction, the expression of Kaltori military doctrine in its purest form. When it appeared in a system, weapons array active, intent declared, the response was fear, or defiance born of fear, or the silence of immediate capitulation. Those were the categories. Corvin's response.
You will address this vessel with appropriate formality. The Kaltori Armada does not take instructions from traffic administrators. You will stand down and acknowledge this communication.
Understood, sir.
The voice at traffic control was still mildly distracted.
Please stand by.
Another pause. Then Corven again. The formality beginning to develop edges.
I am informing you that continued non-compliance will be treated as a formal provocation, requiring a response from the Kaltori Armada.
Sorry, sir. One moment.
The voice had not changed register. It was occupied with something else in the background. A faint clicking sound, elsewhere on the recording.
Someone will be with you shortly. Please stand by.
On the flag bridge, Teth had not written anything in several seconds. His stylus was moving slightly without producing marks. His expression was that of an officer who had decided that the only professionally acceptable response to what he was hearing was not to have one. He appeared to be succeeding, mostly. The Kaltori Armada had sent its finest warship to make clear to the humans of the Sol system what it felt like to stand in Kaltori attention. The humans had made them stand by. On the recording, the silence had texture. It was the silence of a man who had delivered a declaration that required compliance and was waiting in the space where compliance was supposed to arrive. It did not arrive. The space remained. Then Corven, the formality strained to its limits.
You will not scan this vessel. You will comply with Kaltori authority immediately.
Sir, your authority does not extend into sovereign Sol space. Power down your weapons array or we will deploy countermeasures.
A raucous alarm sounded on the recording from the Vindicator's blade's own bridge. Loud, strident, a targeting lock. The alarm cut out. Then a familiar voice through the silence. Unhurried, calm, entirely without ceremony. Captain, this is Mr. Wallen at Gem 4. Our scan has identified 217 critical safety violations aboard your vessel. Your antimatter containment field is fluctuating by 0.8%. I am classifying your vessel as a navigational hazard, pending engineering inspection. Corvin's response was immediate.
You have no authority over a Kaltori military vessel. Stand down your scan at once. Stand down all systems and withdraw.
I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. Wallen deadpanned. A sound entered the recording, low, sustained, a frequency that sat below speech and made itself known in the chest.
What is that?
Corvin said, the voice of a man who already understood that he did not want the answer. That's our primary tractor beam, Captain. For the safety of your crew and the civilian traffic in the approach corridor, we're bringing you in for a safety inspection.
You will cease that immediately. This vessel is under Kaltori military authority. You will stand down at once.
Captain, Wallen's voice had not changed register. It was the voice of someone conveying a practical fact, nothing more.
With that level of power instability in your power distribution grid, firing your primary weapons will very likely breach your own reactor containment. You would lose the ship. I'd recommend against it.
Eitri was aware, in the part of his thinking that had not stopped functioning, of what had just happened. Wallen had not brought a larger weapon. He had not brought a fleet. He had run a scan, identified what the scan showed him, and then used what the scan showed him. The weapon Wallen used against the Vindicator's blade was the Vindicator's blade. It had been there from the moment the ship arrived in Sol Space. It had always been there. Wallen had simply been the first person to read the results and say it plainly. The recording held a silence. The sound of a captain standing on the bridge of his ship, weapons array active, and nothing to do with it. The tractor beam held its frequency in the recording. Corven issued no weapons order. He issued no order at all. What the log also recorded, underneath the beam frequency, was the ambient sound of the bridge crew at their stations. None of them spoke. None of them moved from post. There was nothing to do from post. The sensor logs recorded the Vindicator's blade being drawn steadily towards the dry dock at Gem 4. No resistance, no further speech. Only the low, sustained sound of the beam and the faint background noise of a crew that was, for the first time in its service history, sitting still while someone else decided what happened next. The doctrine had not failed. The doctrine had been made irrelevant. Eitri had spent his career understanding the difference between those two outcomes and making certain his ships never experienced the second. He understood now that he had been calculating for the wrong variable. On the flag bridge of the Imperator's will, Eitri's hands moved. Slowly, from the small of his back to the edge of his console. His fists closed on the rail with a steadiness that was not calm. Nor did he, for once, try to make it look like it was.
Continue,
he said. The third section of the logs had no compression. These were local recordings made inside the dry dock facility itself. Eitri had not moved. Teth had not spoken. The flag bridge held the silence of a room full of people who had just heard something that they had not been prepared for, and were still processing it, and were now waiting for what came next. What came next was the sound of work. Cutting equipment, a welding rig cycling through a long pass, the rhythmic impact of structural work on the hull. These sounds arrived first, before any voice. Just the sounds of a facility in operation performing a task. The faint suggestion beneath the industrial noise of a large space with high ceilings and multiple teams moving through it. Then voices carrying over top of it.
I have to say.
A pause, appreciative.
Look at the lines on this. It's beautiful, like a museum piece.
It really is.
Another voice, dry. You'd never take it into an actual fight, though.
No.
The first voice, not unkind.
Look at this power coupling. Single point of failure for the entire port side. One blown component and the whole run goes dark.
On the flag bridge, Teth's stylus had stopped moving. Not because he was recording something, because he had, apparently, forgotten he was supposed to be.
I've never seen a design philosophy like it.
A third voice, not mocking, working through a puzzle.
It's as if the possibility of catastrophic failure was ruled out at the design stage. As if the logic was, the design is correct, therefore failure is not a variable that needs accounting for. Have these folks never been visited by Captain Murphy?
Yeah, the dry voice. I know the type. Eitri was watching his flagstaff. Not the display. His flagstaff. He was watching what the faces of 8 disciplined Kaltori officers were doing with the information coming through the speakers. And what they were doing was the bare minimum required. Held in place by the discipline that was the only resource currently available. The cutter started again, deep in the ship. Someone called a measurement. Someone else answered it.
You have to feel for the crew.
The first voice had shifted from appreciation to something quieter, something closer to concern, arriving without drama.
Imagine crewing this thing, knowing one failed fuse could space you all.
They seemed all right. A different voice, from further inside the facility. Shaken up, but all right. We'll get them a proper meal before the debrief.
Good.
A pause.
Anyone seen the unicorn?
Back on shift.
The welding rig started up again somewhere in the ship. A voice laughed at something too distant to make out. He had assumed contempt. That was the vocabulary available to him for an encounter that ended this way. a defeated force, in the hands of the victor who would make certain the defeat was understood. He had been prepared for contempt. He had been prepared to respond to it. The humans were not contemptuous. They had not been contemptuous at any point. They had found a ship in distress, classified it as a safety problem, fixed the safety problem, fed the crew, and were discussing it now with the professional equanimity of people who had done a solid day's work and had opinions about the engineering involved. They were not performing victory. They did not appear to have noticed there was a victory available. There was background noise for a while, multiple teams across different stations, voices at a distance, the rhythm of people who had tasks and were completing them. No urgency, no drama. The work continued. On the flag bridge, Teth had taken out his stylus. He was not recording bridge data. His data slate was held at a slight angle, and the stylus was moving with deliberate care, building a list of terms in sequence as they arrived through the dry dock audio. Redundancy, failsafe, distributed load, structural integrity margin, backup pathway. He was transcribing a vocabulary his engineering doctrine had never needed because it had never acknowledged the conditions those words described. He did not look up. He did not appear to notice the Grand Admiral watching him. Eitri had not ordered it. A voice called from further back in the dry dock. A moment later, the first voice answered it.
Right, let's get this thing properly bolted together before it shakes itself apart.
The log ended. Teth closed the playback and stood with his data slate, and for a moment, neither of them spoke.
Analysis,
Eitri said. Teth delivered it standing. His voice was the measured cadence of a formal report. Findings in sequence, conclusions grounded in what the evidence supported. He used, in the course of the next quarter hour, a set of terms he had not possessed at the start of the day. Redundancy, backup grid, failsafe, distributed load, structural integrity margin. He used them with the ease of a man drawing from native vocabulary. He did not appear to notice that they were not.
Standard Kaltori combat doctrine is founded on a single certainty, he said. Every vessel in any fleet we have encountered operates on the same fundamental design principle as our own. One primary power coupling, centralized. No redundant pathway, no backup system. The coupling is the ship. Destroy it in the opening exchange and the vessel dies. Cascade failure across every connected system. Total loss from a single hit. The doctrine has never failed. In its entire operational history, it has not failed once, because every ship we have ever fought was built as ours are. They had the same coupling. They had no redundancy. Our targeting system has always known exactly where to look, because there was only ever one place to look. A pause. It has only ever been tested against other Kaltori ships, or those built nearly identical to ours. I have developed a simulation to demonstrate.
He transferred the simulation to the forward display.
The Dreadnought executed doctrine correctly. Its scan identified the primary coupling of the Vindicator's blade, and the opening strike hit the target. The hit was absorbed, distributed across the backup grid. 2 pathways degraded, the remaining pathways held. The Vindicator's blade retained full operational capacity and returned fire.
On the screen, the simulation played without sound, the opening strike landing cleanly on the coupling it had been built to destroy. The cascade failure not arriving. The Vindicator returning fire from multiple weapons emplacements simultaneously. The emplacements drawing from non-adjacent nodes at once. A simultaneous draw from distributed non-adjacent sources reads on a targeting system as a single degraded output. As damaged return fire from a crippled vessel. It was not.
The Dreadnought's targeting system classified the return fire as a weakened shot from a damaged opponent and did not recalibrate its shielding. The distributed fire hit across the full shield aperture simultaneously. The Dreadnought lost primary weapons and drives in a single exchange.
He paused. Then,
They didn't just strengthen the ship, Admiral. They built a vessel that defeats our combat doctrine by existing. Our targeting system was looking for a vulnerability that is no longer there.
He set his data slate down.
It was not a fight. It was an execution.
The flag bridge held the silence of a room that had just received the word execution and understood exactly what it meant.
How many vessels in the Armada carry the original coupling configuration?
Teth did not need to check.
All of them, Admiral.
Their fleet. How many of their vessels are built to this specification?
Unknown. We have no complete inventory of human engineering output. What we know is that Gem 4 is a maintenance and repair shipyard, not a construction shipyard. The refit used surplus freighter composites from existing station stock.
He paused.
If a repair station working from surplus parts produces this result, I am not in a position to speak to what a dedicated construction yard produces.
Eitri looked at the display.
No, he said. Neither am I.
He stood at the forward rail of the flag bridge, and he did not speak, and he did not move, and he looked at the image on the display. The flag bridge was quiet. It had been quiet since Teth set the data slate down. 8 staff officers at 8 stations, every function operating as designed. The silence they were holding for him, the most professionally demanding thing he had ever asked of them. He was aware of this. He made no acknowledgement of it. The ambient sound of the flag bridge was the sound it had always been, the low hum of systems operating correctly, air cycling, consoles processing, the faint, steady note of a flagship at its moorings. Everything was in order. Everything as it should be. He had stood at this rail for 11 years aboard this ship, and the sound had never changed, and it did not change now. And the fact that it did not change now felt in some way that he did not try to name, like its own kind of problem. On the display, the transformed Vindicator's blade. He had first seen it less than a day ago, when it resolved on the main screen, and he had read it as an insult. Mismatched plating over the original skin, where clean geometry should have been. Conduit runs along the port side, bracketed at regular intervals in neat, methodical rows. Scaffolding across the reactor housing at even spacing, load distributed with evident care. Fitted by someone who had assessed the original structure and found it insufficient, and corrected it as a matter of course. He had not stopped looking at the scaffolding. Before Teth's analysis and simulation, the scaffolding had been an offense. After it, the scaffolding was something else. The physical shape of a concept his engineering doctrine had refused to acknowledge for nearly all of its history. Not a confession of weakness, not uncertainty baked into the structure, a solution, bolted onto his finest warship by a team in stained work clothing who had looked at a problem and solved it in a workmanlike fashion. Because that was what you did with problems. Teth had not moved. He stood where he had stood since delivering the final line of his report, with the stillness of a man whose work is done, and whose admiral is not yet finished absorbing it. 11 years at Eitri's side. He had learned in that time that some things could not be hurried, and that the correct response to those things was to hold position and remain available. The flag bridge held its silence around him, 8 officers each doing exactly what they were required to do, which, at this moment, was nothing, bringing to that nothing the same exactness they brought to everything. On the display, the conduit running along the port side caught the light at an angle. The original skin of the Vindicator's blade was still visible beneath the new plating in places, the clean Kaltori geometry showing through the additions the way the bones of a structure showed through new work built over it. The humans had not replaced the original. They had improved it. They had done it in 3 days, working from surplus materials because men in stained work clothes had looked at the result of a scan and made a professional decision. He thought about what had come through the dry dock audio, not the words, the quality of the voices. The engineers moving through the ship with their cutting equipment and their welding rigs, talking the way people talked when they were doing work they understood. Not performing, not addressing an audience, working. The one who had said you had to feel for the crew. The voice that had shifted from appreciation to concern when it considered what it would mean to fly a ship that could fail that way. The practical answer from further in the facility, a proper meal before the debrief. He had prepared his response to contempt. He had no prepared response to this. The Kaltori built their response systems the way they built their ships. One correct answer for each situation. No backup path. He had built the correct answer to the situation he had sent the Vindicator's blade to create. The situation he had sent it to create had not occurred. The situation that had occurred was a maintenance team, a tractor beam, and a pre-recorded message from a man in stained work clothes who had gone back to work. He looked at the Vindicator's blade on the display. The ugly ship, the wrong ship, the ship that had left this anchorage had been beautiful. it had also been dying. The most dangerous vessel in the Kaltori Armada, carrying modifications fitted in 3 days by a maintenance team from surplus freighter parts, which would, in any engagement against Kaltori vessels operating under standard doctrine, end the engagement before the other ship understood what was happening. He thought about the 38 vessels of the Armada, not the abstract number, the ships at their exact positions, the patrol routes and staging points, the forward anchorage, the reserve formation that had not moved in 3 years, every one of them built identically to what the Vindicator's blade had been before it arrived in Sol Space. Every one of them operating under the assumption that the doctrine was sufficient, because the doctrine had always been sufficient against every opponent they had ever encountered. Recall orders would reach the Armada's vessel within hours. Every one of them would turn and come home. The doctrine had been sufficient. He did not dispute that. Against every opponent they had ever encountered, the doctrine had not failed. The problem was not the doctrine. The problem was the variable the doctrine had never been tested against. The scaffolding on the display. The bracket spacing, the load distribution. Someone had looked at his finest warship and found 217 ways it could fail. They had addressed all 217, on schedule, at no charge, and asked nothing in return except that the crew be comfortable for the debrief. Eitri looked at the display for a long time. His eyes did not leave the scaffolding. Then quietly, in a voice without the certainty it had always carried,
"Get me every technical manual Captain Corvan was given. Every one.
A beat.
And recall the fleet."